Right, we are going to jump in. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Jesse. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the Campaign and Communications Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. We are so grateful to the over 500 people who have registered for our call today. We are going to walk through what the landscape looks like post Grants Pass, what we are doing to fight the criminalization of homelessness. And I'm really excited that we'll be able to hear from some organizers on the ground who have been doing, who have actually had some victories. I know most of us are still reeling from the Supreme Court defeat, and that is real, but we also want to remember that the work continues and that we are still winning fights across the country. Please use the chat. Please introduce yourself. We have 200 people on this call, which is phenomenal. As a reminder, we will be recording this call and sending out to the Handcuffs list. We will remind you of how to get on that list if you're not already. And we hope this is just one of the many times we'll be able to engage as a community as we work together to not only fight against the criminalization of homelessness, but build a country and a society where everyone has the housing we need to thrive. It's really amazing looking at everybody's names and intros in the chats. We have people from all across the country, from Hawaii, from California, from Wisconsin. It looks like most states are represented, which is really phenomenal because we know that we are a powerful network of people who know that throwing folks in jail is not a solution to homelessness. And we are excited to continue to work together to fight for the housing that we need as a society. Before we dive into our agenda, I want to take a moment to review some group norms. If we can move to the next slide, we are going to try to build this into all of the work we do together because we know that this work is based on community and trust, and we want to be respectful of how we engage with each other. So anyone expressing racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, or otherwise oppressive sentiment will be immediately removed from the meeting. This is your warning. Don't do those things. Please remember that we are all trying our best. Please come with an open mind and engage in good faith. I know all of us have a gabillion things to do, and we're so grateful to everyone for joining us, and we really are all trying our best. If you have a question to ask, please do so using the Q&A function. That enables us on the back end to sort questions, to assign them to the right person, and to keep track of what we have and haven't answered. When they're in the chat, it makes it harder for us to track them and get your questions answered. So if you have a question, please ask it, but please use the Q&A function via Zoom. And if you have chats, things and thoughts, reflections, resources, links that you want to share with the whole group, please do utilize the chat feature in Zoom. As a reminder, this call will be recorded and we will be distributing it to the Handcuffs listserv. Let's move into our agenda. Thank you, Haley. We have a jam-packed agenda, so as folks are already doing now, please introduce yourself in the chat. It's been a minute since we have convened the entire Handcuffs campaign, and a lot of things have changed. And a lot of things have stayed the same. We know that housing still ends homelessness. That has not changed. And we know that there are right-wing moneyed interests who are trying to throw homeless people in jail. Those things have not changed. But the movement itself is strong and we're gaining power. And one of the ways we express our power is by being here together. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to talk briefly about what we're seeing across the country post Grants Pass. We're going to dive into a discussion of some of the ways we are responding, but no, this list is not exhaustive. So have a whole section at the end for folks on this call to share feedback and ideas about other things we can be doing to support the work being done to fight the criminalization of homelessness. We have many brilliant minds who are going to be sharing some of the things that they're working on, including Pranav, who just published an amazing research study that, surprise, surprise, shows that what we've been saying for years is true. Clearing encampments doesn't address public safety and makes homelessness worse. We'll also be joined by Mary Castaldi from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities to walk through some things that cities and states could and should be doing instead of throwing folks in jail. And then we'll also hear for field updates from our partners in Maine and Virginia, and then we're going to dive into a listening session. So we're going to get the show on the road. We can move to the next slide. But again, please keep introducing yourself in the chat. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and names and so many new faces and names. Um, and as a reminder again, because we get this question all the time, this call will be recorded and we will be sending it out to the Housing.Handcuffs page. So folks know that the Supreme Court said that cities and states made it easier for cities and states to throw folks experiencing homelessness into jail or give them tickets. And what we predicted would happen is happening very, very fast. Over 100 laws criminalizing homelessness have been introduced in cities and states across the country. This includes 60 laws that have been passed and over 40 laws that are pending and working their way through the legislative process. It's really important for us to name that nearly half of these laws come out of California. I know we have so many California partners on the call, and the California laws that are passing, in addition to Governor Newsom's executive order, really show that California is taking a very, very harmful approach to addressing homelessness. And what we know across the country is true in California. These laws are not going to end homelessness. They're going to keep people homeless longer. They're going to increase the interactions people have with the criminal legal system. They are going to divert resources away from housing and towards things like jail, courts, police, things that make homelessness worse. Most of these bills include or enforce bans on public camping. But these bills don't include anything that actually helps people. So these bills are designed to punish people for sleeping outside, to push people experiencing homelessness around, but nothing in these bills will get to the root cause of homelessness, which is the dire lack of housing that people can afford. 10 of the bills propose over $1,000 fines for people camping in public. If people sleeping outside had $1,000 to pay for a fine, they probably wouldn't be sleeping outside. But we know that when we give people fines they can't pay, that ends in ruined credit, that ends in jail, that ends in additional fines and fees, all of which will make it harder for someone to find housing, and all of which make it harder to get employment and get folks the resources they need to end homelessness. And Illinois is the second leading state. So first we have California, and then we have Illinois, as they're the #2 state in introducing these harmful anti-homeless laws. I have to be honest, this is happening even faster than I thought it would happen. And it seems like every day we are learning more and more cities and municipalities introducing laws that would make it illegal to experience homelessness. We are working on different ways to think about how we can visualize this data, but we know that this is only going to keep increasing. So one of the things we're very interested in as a movement is thinking how we can cross-pollinate. Everyone is working against similar forces, right? These same right-wing moneyed interests and politicians who want to throw homeless folks in jail. We don't need to be recreating the wheel in every city or every state, and we're excited to see how we can use the collective brain power of this call and of this movement to work on solutions that can be cross-pollinated against different cities and different states, and we'll hear some case studies of how that is going later. Let's move to the next slide, because while 100 laws is really bad, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that some cities have done the right thing. And this is a reminder that politicians have choices. And unfortunately, politicians in over 100 cities have made the wrong choice, but 16 cities have made the right choice. Criminalization ordinances have been defeated. We'll hear about one of those later today. We also know that cities are introducing resolutions and bills to affirm the rights that people experiencing homelessness had before grants passed, and that work is just getting started. Illinois also introduced a statewide bill prohibiting the enforcement of anti-sleeping ordinances. So a common refrain we hear from elected officials is, there's nothing we can do, we got to throw homeless folks in jail. And we want to lift up these positive actions because there are absolutely other things that cities can do and cities are doing to prevent the criminalization of homelessness. And we want to make sure that we're lifting up good things that are happening, because we have to celebrate the good even amidst a whole ton of bad. There are still positive change happening, and we're going to hear a little bit more later on this call about how those positive changes are working into two very specific communities. Let's move to the next slide. So we're going to talk through the different ways that we are responding as a national movement, and then again have a half hour dedicated to hearing from folks at the end of this call about what else would be helpful, what are we missing, what shouldn't we be doing, what resources can we provide, because we really do want to be responsive to the people on this call who are day in and day out doing this work on the ground. We're going to talk about some legislation we're calling the Gloria Johnson Act. We're going to talk about some work we are doing around the presidential transition, and then we're also going to talk about ways that we are engaging with mayors across the country. I'm going to turn it over to Malik from the Southern Poverty Law Center, who's going to talk us through the basics of the Gloria Johnson Act and also give us an update on where the federal bill stands.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Great.
You're great.
Yeah, so like Jesse said, my name is Malik. I'm working with Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm going to talk a little bit about, Jesse talked about some of the awful things that are happening, but hopefully I'm going to talk about one that's good, which is the Gloria Johnson anti-criminalization bill that we've been working on. Essentially, what the bill does, and it's a response to the Grant Pass decision, it would prohibit cities, states, localities, and the federal government from enforcing any statute or ordinance that imposes civil or criminal penalties on unhoused persons for exercising certain rights. And in the bill, we outline some of those rights as right to conduct life-sustaining activities on public land, right to use and move freely on public land, right to be free from civil and criminal penalties for soliciting, sharing, or offering food or any donations on public land, a right to pray, meditate, or worship on public land. So those are some of the rights that the bill sort of outlines that states and local governments couldn't impose civil penalties or criminal penalties on for a person exercising those rights. The bill also creates an affirmative defense. So if someone is arrested, they can use the fact that they've been exercising these rights as a defense at any trial. In addition, the bill would give the Attorney General the power to take action against any states or localities that violates those rights. And additionally, we create a private right to action. So someone could sue a state or locality for their rights being violated. The bill kind of has two parts. I mean, one is could be used locally. So if the bill was introduced locally, it would stop the state from doing it. And then the avenue that sort of I've been working on is trying to work on having a federal bill that does the same. Sort of preempting state laws that do violate these rights. One of the sort of challenges that we've come up against is, we have this whole concept of anti-commandeering, that the federal government can't sort of force states to do certain acts unless there's some enumerated powers within the Constitution. Of course, the Grant Pass decision makes that a little bit complicated by saying that these ordinances are not a violation of the Eighth Amendment. And so one of the things that we're sort of grappling with now is trying to sort of figure out that constitutional hook that we can get this bill introduced while prohibiting states from taking these actions. Another thing that we've been thinking about is potentially.
Malik, sorry to interrupt. We're getting a few requests. If you could speak just a little bit longer.
Sorry. Can everyone hear me now?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. One of the things I was saying is one of the challenges we're facing is trying to figure out the right sort of constitutional hook that would allow the federal government to force states not to impose these ordinances. I was saying that the Grants Pass decision makes that a little complicated because now we couldn't say that it's a violation of the Eighth Amendment, but I think we're also looking at potentially the 14th Amendment, and we've also been looking at potentially getting the hook under the Commerce Clause. So I think that's something we're working on in terms of the federal hook there. A couple other things we're considering is maybe also including some sort of spending clause. So and we see this often where the federal government says, certain funds are, well, I guess there's two approaches. Certain funds are only going to be allowed to states and municipalities that don't have these ordinances, or creating some incentive so that states and localities could be incentivized not to enact such ordinances. And then another thing we've been considering is potentially limiting it to federal land, at least in the federal bill, so that there could be no criminalization for unhoused folks on federal land. So we're kind of in the process of trying to fine tune the legislation with the hopes of introducing it on the federal level in Congress beginning of next year. Jesse, hopefully I covered everything there.
That was great. Thank you, Malik. So stay tuned. We're looking at a January bill introduction, and we will, of course, be sharing with folks on with our networks when that happens and how we can all work together to get that passed. But in addition to federal legislation, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Tarst from the Law Center to talk about local and state bills using a similar idea.
Hey, Jesse, thank you. So I'm dropping in the chat the template legislation that we've put out and hope that everybody is familiar with. The federal legislation goes broadly along the same lines. So everything that Malik was just sharing is kind of in there. This is the same sort of model, but designed to be implemented at the state or local level. And we've got really good news in that this approach has been catching fire across a number of states, particularly in the Northeast. We've been in touch with state officials in Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Maine. I've heard things are going on in Connecticut and Vermont as well. And Minnesota we've been in touch with some officials there. And I just reached out this morning to another one. So there are a number of states where it's very likely that this legislation is going to be introduced early in the next legislative session. We also, as Jesse mentioned earlier, the city of Philadelphia issued a resolution condemning the grants pass decision. We've seen that happen in a couple of other smaller localities as well. And so there's definitely some efforts out there at both the state and local level, acknowledging the harm that the grants pass decision has caused and already pushing towards actual policy solutions. Jesse also mentioned there is an Illinois bill that was already introduced the day of the grants pass decision that says that the state can't or localities can't enforce anti-sleeping ordinances in certain circumstances. That bill, while it's fantastic and it shows that people are out there already putting pen to paper on this stuff, it doesn't have the full scope of protections that the template legislation has, so that we're not kind of pushing that as the model, but we are saying this is an example that's out there, but the model is the one that I dropped in the chat earlier. So that's the good news, is that there are people out there who are working on this already, and happy to be in touch with folks in those states to help think more about how to push those, and in states that I didn't mention yet, to think about how we can get things introduced. My hope is that we might even be able to coordinate some efforts and get everything introduced either on a single day or in a series in January to try and draw some more attention to the issue and really show that people are taking a strong stand. But that's to be determined. So yeah.
Thanks,
Jesse?
Eric. Yes, please reach out to us if folks have more questions or interested in working with your local electeds. We'd be happy to join meetings or do really whatever we can to make sure that this is happening across the country. There are a few questions for you, Eric, in the chat that I want to flag, or in the Q&A. And then Eric, while you're off mute, can you talk a little bit about the presidential transition memo that we're working on as well?
Yep. Yeah, I just wanted to pause before that. Yeah, so in the chat, does Philadelphia have any inconsistent ordinances? Not inconsistent ordinances, but the current mayor has taken a much harsher stance against using constructive measures to end homelessness, in particular in the Kensington neighborhood, and has been engaging in sweeps of homeless encampments there. It is not good, and so this is part, the city council resolution is part of trying to move the city council in a direction that shows that, you know, the mayor doesn't speak for everybody in the city. Yeah, that's there are much larger policy conversations happening in Philadelphia that that resolution is a part of. I don't have the name of the Illinois bill off the top of my head, but I will look it up when I'm done talking and drop the bill number in the chat. The Gloria Johnson Act is named after Gloria Johnson, the lead plaintiff in the Johnson versus Grants Pass case. We reached out and asked if she wanted her name to be attached to this, and the attorneys who were working with her said she would be honored by that. We want to make sure that her name doesn't go down as just attached to this terrible Supreme Court decision, but that she has this affirmative legacy. Obviously, if there's, you know, reasons at the local level or the state level that folks want to introduce it with some more locally relevant names, that is also fine. But this is kind of what we're using for the template national legislation. Yeah. And so I'll move on from those questions to the presidential transition memo. We are working on a memo together with partners in the National Coalition for Housing Justice. Two memos, one specifically on housing policy. We recognize the best way to make sure that people aren't criminalized is to have them in housing. And so we're hoping that that's a large part of what can be done in a new administration and a new Congress. But we also want to make sure that we have some lines drawn, that we are doing harm reduction by trying to take away methods of criminalization. And so we are asking the new administration to issue an executive order that would, similar to the federal Gloria Johnson Act, ask that federal agencies that have police forces that enforce land laws on federal lands to develop policies and protocols to make sure that they are not enforcing any of these laws, criminalizing homelessness, criminalizing camping or sleeping on federal lands when there's nowhere else where people can go, to mandate that they are instead referred to housing or other services, and that the laws won't be enforced if those aren't available to each individual. We're also asking for federal data collection. We know that in most places, we don't know who is being criminalized, that housing status is not something that most police departments sort their data by. So while some things are more obvious, like anti-camping ordinances, many communities use anti-trespass or disorderly conduct or other ordinances that might not be focused specifically on people experiencing homelessness. So we know that's largely how they are being used. But to be able to collect this national data will help us make the case that this is bad policy, that it isn't solving anything. We're also calling for agencies with federal funding authority to related to homelessness to expand the incentives that they have there. to stop communities from engaging in criminalization. We want the new administration to be a part of the push to pass the federal Gloria Johnson Act. And as well, we want to be making sure that the administration uses all of its branches, including the Justice Department, to help fight criminalization of homelessness at the local level and the state level. So it has been filing some cases, some statement of interest briefs, including criminalization of homelessness in its civil rights investigations. And so those are all things that have been happening in the Biden administration that we want a new administration to continue. And then last but not least, we want, in line with the People's Response Act that Cori Bush introduced this past Congress, Division of Public Safety within the Department of Housing and or Health and Human Services to help develop a non-law enforcement approach to mental health concerns and other crises in the community. And these are all things that the administration can do without congressional action. There's more that they could do with Congress. So that's what we're going for.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was very comprehensive and very helpful. I hope folks, I know some of this is really insider baseball, and we'll talk more about some more outside strategies that we're employing, but I did want folks to just be aware of some of the things that we're thinking on the federal level. I'm now going to turn it over to Alec from the National Alliance to End Homelessness to talk about some work we are thinking about, not necessarily with a mayor of a city, but these broader national coalitions of mayors, groups that already convene elected officials on the national level.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Jesse. Happy to be with everyone today. So I'm just going to be providing a very quick update on some of the engagement work that national partners are trying to do with a lot of different local and state decision makers. So we know that everyone in your communities are doing amazing work day in and day out, connecting with your decision makers, and we're only one small part of that puzzle. Something that we're trying to work on is trying to engage not only the known actors, for example, the mayors, the city councils, but also trying to think holistically about some of the other decision makers at the city, the county, and the state level who have different levers in place, who might not know a lot about homelessness, or who might be able to be more swayed when hearing about evidence and humane-based alternatives. So a couple of examples of these groups, might be, the obvious one is like the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who we've conducted some outreach to, but we're also thinking more expansively, right? There's a lot of other different associations like the Cities Chiefs Association, the National Sheriff's Association, the Council on State Governments, the American Public Works Association, all these different groups that represent a number of different decision makers who all touch homelessness in some way. And if we can make sure that they're on our side, that they can be really great allies on the ground in terms of pushing back against a lot of these tendencies and urges to criminalize homelessness, and to be able to really push for anti-criminalization policies at the state and local level, and also trying to marshal resources. So as kind of part of this process, we'd love any feedback. If anyone has any suggestions for specific groups, it'd be helpful to reach out with. We do want to acknowledge that we're not trying to parachute into any specific community. You all are the experts on engaging your own specific elected and other administrative officials. But we're trying to engage these organizations at a national level to try to get out the word at a much larger level, to be able to share information on evidence-based practices with their members, and to be able to serve as a resource and a partner to engage in information sharing, to again make sure that these communities and these decision makers, regardless if they think that homelessness is within their domain, remind them that they do have tools in their toolbox to really be part of the solution here. So thank you everyone for your continued work on this front, and we will provide updates as we can. Back to you, Jesse.
Thanks, Alec. I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone for chiming in the chat. I know I am learning a ton, so thank you for dropping all of your wisdom in the chat. And this is one of the great things about our network. People are brilliant and have so many great ideas. So I'm very glad that Zoom saves the chat, because there is a gold mine of information in there. Thank you. Please keep it coming. And please, again, keep using the Q&A function. We're trying to get the answer the best as we can as we move through our conversation today. And as I've said again, and I'll say before, we know that this plan that we laid out is by no means comprehensive, even of stuff we could be doing on the federal level, but we are actively thinking and would actively love to set up conversations with folks on this call to see what we can and should be doing to support you on the ground. We have an amazing team of national partners who are thinking about this and thinking about how to structure our campaign in a post-Grants Pass world. So we are very, very excited to hear from y'all. Please reach out. We'll put all of our contact information. You'll get all of our contact information, but please let's keep this conversation going. To switch gears, I am really excited that we're joined by Pranav Padmanabhan, who I think just this week released research that shows that evicting homeless encampments doesn't address public safety. This, I know, is a major talking point that elected officials use to justify clearing encampments. And now we have even more evidence to show that it just is not true. So I'm going to turn over to Pranav, who has some slides, and I'm just very, very excited that we'll get to learn from him together.
Thanks so much, Jesse. I'm really excited to be here to talk a little bit about the research that we just published. My name is Pranav. I'm a Master's of Public Health student in epidemiology at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And our study was looking at the impact of sweeps on crime in Denver, Colorado over a 4-year period. So just a little bit of background with the study. We've seen a lot of evidence, especially over the last few years, that sweeps are horrible for the health of people experiencing homelessness. We know they increase the risk of overdose, they increase violence, and they can decrease life expectancy by up to 25%. But despite all this evidence, we keep hearing from city officials and policymakers that sweeps are necessary to promote public safety. When we looked at the data on that, we saw very little evidence to support that. So we wanted to design a study looking at a large number of sweeps over a long period of time to really answer this question about community safety. Next slide, please. So just to touch a little bit on how we did the methods very briefly. So we looked at a little over 300 sweeps in Denver from November 2019 to July 2023. We looked at 3 different areas. We looked at areas within a quarter mile, a half mile, and a 0.75 mile radius of an encampment. And we essentially compared the number of crimes that happened before the sweep to the number of crimes that happened after the sweep in that area. So looking at that picture, if the red triangle represents an encampment, the orange dots would be the crimes that happened in the week before. The purple dots are the crimes that happened in the week after, and we essentially just compared them. Next slide, please. So looking at our results, so we started out just looking at composite crime. So we didn't differentiate by what type of crime. We just wanted to see what happens when we look at all crimes. Looking at that third column, we saw that within that quarter mile radius, we actually saw a decrease of about 1 crime per sweep around 3 weeks. However, when we looked beyond that period, we essentially saw no changes in crime. And when we looked at areas slightly outside of that radius, looking at that half mile and the 0.75 mile radius, we essentially saw no changes in crime. Next slide, please. However, when we drilled down deeper and looked at what types of crimes were driving any changes we saw a very different story. So when we looked at that decrease within the quarter mile radius, we saw that there were really only 2 types of crimes that were contributing to that change. Those were auto theft and those were public disorder. And we know that public disorder crimes are disproportionately affected against people experiencing homelessness. However, what was sort of lost in that composite decrease was an increase, especially in other crimes against persons, which is simple assault. And we even saw an increase in murder. However, it's a very small sample size, but we thought it was really important to note that when we looked at the crimes against persons, which are the violent crimes that people are oftentimes most interested in, we actually saw an increase after sweeps. So we thought that that was really important to highlight, that this shouldn't be lost in the larger picture, is that not only is there really no evidence that long-term sweeps have an impact on public safety, but they actually might increase violence in some circumstances. Next slide, please. So when we look at our key takeaways from this study, the first is that sweeps don't improve community safety. So this is not only backed up by our study, but looking at other papers from looking at qualitative evidence, looking at studies of individual sweeps, we again and again see that this criminal policy really has no effect on neighborhood level crime. So when we hear policymakers and residents talk about how sweeps are necessary to improve public safety, we don't really see that playing out in the evidence. The second takeaway is that drilling down deeper, we see that sweeps may actually make the community more violent. And we see this especially for people experiencing homelessness. There was another study that was published just this week that found that in California, people experiencing homelessness report being the victim of a violent crime at a rate of 38%, which is compared to only 1% of those who are housed. So when we look at our finding that crimes against persons oftentimes increase after a sweep, it's important to remember that that is disproportionately affecting people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, especially. And then finally, I think our study points to a need to redefine what we consider crime. So oftentimes we see policymakers point to the data and say, look, there is this decrease that you saw, even if it's just one crime a week, that makes people safer. But when we look at what types of crimes that is, oftentimes that is a public disorder crime, which is a crime that in many places is literally designed to be committed by people experiencing homelessness. And this is enforced by police officers who are oftentimes stationed near encampments, as well as residents who are calling in these crimes when they see an encampment. So it's while people experiencing homelessness are much more likely to be the people in the data who are committing these public disorder crimes, they're oftentimes also much less likely to be reporting crimes because of fear of criminalization. So when we look at that increase in violent crimes, that is very likely an underestimate because we know that people experiencing homelessness are much less likely to report crimes that happen against them. So I think when we zooming out, when we are considering this debate about public safety, not only is it important to show that the data doesn't suggest that sweeps are making our community any safer, but that oftentimes people experiencing homelessness are left out of the conversation about who is considered members of the public. That's all from me. I'll link the PDF to the study in the chat, as well as include my email. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. This was so insightful. I think it's also really important to name that the fact that people experience homelessness in the richest country in the world is a crime. It's criminal that we have these solutions right in front of us. And we really have to shift the conversation away from actions individual people experiencing homelessness do to survive versus these systems that keep Black and brown people at disproportionate rates of homelessness. This is going to be an integral tool in our toolbox to combat all of these myths. So I think we have this study, we have the study that Pranav mentioned that shows people experiencing homelessness are much like 40 times more likely to be the victim of a crime than a house person. We also have studies that show clearing encampments is damaging to collective public health and to the health of individuals experiencing homelessness. And we're pulling together this set of proof to really rebut all of these ideas that politicians use to justify the clearing of encampments. But we know they're not actually clearing encampments because they care about public safety or they care about improving conditions for people experiencing homelessness. They are clearing encampments because they don't want to see people experiencing homelessness in their community, and they want to sanitize their downtown areas from people who have no choice but to live outside, which brings us back to power building. And it's not going to be just enough to say, like, here's a study, you're wrong. It's really the collective work of building power in our cities and across the country to have more power than the people who want to throw homeless folks in jail. And that is what we are excited to do. We know that so often elected officials throw up their hands and say, I wish we had a good idea to solve homelessness. There's nothing we can do. And we know that that's not true. And I'm excited to turn over to Mari, who has compiled some of the many, many things that elected officials can and should be doing instead of throwing homeless folks in jail.
Thanks, Jesse, and hi, everyone. Thanks so much to the Law Center for your leadership and for bringing us all together here. And it's great to see lots of friends and colleagues on the call. So I'm Mari Castaldi. I'm the Director of State Housing Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm here to share sort of a new set of resources that we have been working on among the national organizations with help from many of you here. So we know that so many of you, and in some cases have been for a very long time, doing incredible work to defend against laws at the state and local level focused on punishing and displacing people, and that work is getting harder and harder, including across the entire political spectrum. And as Jesse mentioned, this is super hard because we know to get to the world that we want, where homelessness as we know it doesn't exist, is going to require so many policy changes to realize that affirmative vision. And as we've been engaging with you all across the country, we're hearing more and more about how you are trying to do that, to focus not just on defense, but how to really move into offense and advance good policy, telling policymakers not just what we want them not to do, but what we need them to do, and at a more granular level, starting to chip away at some of those affirmative changes, like removing barriers to housing, increasing access to rental subsidies and income supports, building new supportive and affordable housing, preventing homelessness, protecting tenants. And so hearing that as national partners, we came together to, as a start, to try to sort of catalog in a way some of the different affirmative policy levers available to state and local governments and coalesce a lot of the resources that are out there. So I will drop into the chat sort of an externally facing version of this sort of affirmative policy levers tools. And it has a load of resources and toolkits, et cetera, that already exist to take on different policy levers. But believe it or not, what's in the chat is actually the short version. And we have a much more detailed version, which really catalogs examples of places that have passed these policies, links to legislative language of things that have passed or been proposed, and even more sort of detailed and granular policy options. And this is really something intended for advocates who are deep in the weeds of trying to launch and advance campaigns. And because we don't want, say, the Cicero Institute to have access to it, I would ask that you can shoot an email my way. I'll put my email in the chat and I can share it with you, because we're trying to sort of keep it inside of our movements and among our advocates. And I also just wanted to say, as CBPP, I know the other national organizations on here, and among all of you as kind of colleagues across the country who helped make this resource real and filled it with resources and knowledge. We really want to support you as you're thinking through not just how to stop things, but how to advance good things. So whether that looks like helping with research, talking points, helping provide testimony, whatever that looks like, please reach out and let us know what you're working on, and let us know what we can add and what examples you have of winning campaigns or at least attempts at good policy that you've been engaged in, because we're hoping that interchange can really support you all in winning good things too. So I'll put my email in the chat and hope to hear from you all and hear more about things like this that we can do to support your work. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks, Mari. Thanks, Pranav. We're moving a little bit ahead of schedule. I'm wondering if Mari and Pranav, I could put you on the spot and see if folks have any like live relevant questions for the entire group that they might want to throw your way. I know folks also have a lot of specific questions that we can connect with offline, but if folks have big questions for our experts, Mari or Pranav, throw them in the Q&A. We have a few minutes. We can be flexible.
Pranav, I don't know if you saw it, but if you open the Q&A, there's a couple questions in there sort of around the research. One is like around narrative building or analysis around why sweeps could actually include violence. like thinking about how to approach that conversation with a legislator, and how not to sort of mischaracterize unhoused people, because we know that association between homelessness and criminality is one that we're working really hard through narrative change to disrupt.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think so our study, the data that we looked at were from the Denver police, and they did not include whether the person experiencing the crime was housed or unhoused. So that's, for our particular study, that's definitely a limitation. However, I think in terms of narrative building, it's definitely important to include the voices of those who are experiencing homelessness and who have experienced violence. Combining our study with qualitative evidence that shows that sweeps are and qualitative evidence as well as surveys that show that people experiencing homelessness are much more likely to experience violence after a sweep. And I think around the piece of not conflating people experiencing homelessness with crime, I think that's also something that we sought to combat with our study, is that we don't see any association at a spatial level between those experiencing homelessness and crimes that are often associated with them. Like we didn't see any association with violent crimes, nothing with robbery, nothing with burglary. So I think that's important in combating stigma, uh, while also including the voices of those with lived experience.
Amazing. I think we might have time for one more question, if folks have one. If not, we're going to keep chugging along. All right. We have a lot of questions that are going to take more than a few minutes to answer. So it's not that we're ignoring them, but the questions around narrative change or motivating factors are worthy, are the right questions to be asking, and are worthy of more than a few minutes. So we are taking note of these big questions and are going to figure out how to address them. I also want to lift up the fact that there's something that I love happening in the chat. It's people who are working in the same city or same state who don't yet know each other and are connecting around this work. That is what we love to see, and we are so excited for folks to be connecting with each other and building power in local communities. We know so many people care about this issue and approach it from so many different angles. So we have people who don't know each other in this chat who live in the same cities, which is amazing because we can do so much more when we work together. Can you share the chat recap? We will try our best. There's so much happening, but we will certainly try our best. I am going to turn it over to updates from the field. I'm excited to introduce Heidi from Maine, who's going to talk about a bill. Well, I'm going to let Heidi talk about what she did, what her group did.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I think this is amazing and I am so excited. I've been copying all of these notes and I cannot wait to share this with absolutely everybody in the state. My name is Heidi Ratcliffe. I work at a community action agency. I'm a social worker by nature, and homelessness is a huge passion of mine. We specifically have started a grassroots effort, a homeless stakeholders group, probably about 5 years ago, really bringing all of the social service agencies together that had a vested interest in serving those who had experience with homelessness. And by that, we were able to get probably about 30 social service agencies who all had a stake or felt strongly about supporting this population. And that with all of us getting together through this grassroots efforts, we would be able to make movement on how to make those changes in our community and be proactive with problems we saw coming down the pike. I'll say that one of the biggest pieces that we did, we're really remote. We're on the tip top of Maine, close to Canada. We have one homeless shelter, a couple DV shelters, and then the next closest shelter to us is 3 hours south, which is at capacity all the time. We've really started seeing homelessness more apt. We're very rural in the fact that it's not in your face all the time. We go to cities and go to New York City and things of that nature and see it all the time. And for the county, that was really challenging. And so I really feel firmly that a lot of our city councilors and members of the community who wanted to put an ordinance and a ban on homelessness weren't sure how to handle it and just didn't know and felt that this was the best approach to try to do that. So I can tell you that when this ban first came out, it was an interest of our agencies, mostly because we had seen this coming down the pike. We had a lot of unmet need in the community. Individuals who were accessing shelter years ago had no place to go during the day. So we were the agency providing those day services. So they had a safe, warm, dry place to utilize that could connect them to the various resources in the community through our community action agency. We quickly developed and knew that housing was an issue. So we decided to, in a sense, make our admin building empty and became homeless ourselves. And we reverted that housing into supportive housing. So we now have a 13-unit facility targeted to those with chronic homelessness. And we have our coaching, so basically licensed social workers on the bottom of the floor to offer supports during the day. We felt that supplying housing for individuals wasn't going to fix homelessness, long-term homelessness immediately. We needed to do more and be more proactive on what we were supporting and providing those individuals. So those pieces were all kind of happening in tandem the same time this ordinance was coming out. So I say that because I really think that that information was kind of pivotal in making the decision turn to table indefinitely the ban on homelessness in Presque Isle, which was a huge win. We were going in with odds against us. It was really scary. And I'm listening to all of these laws and pieces. And I said, holy Hannah, I wish I knew of all of this. We went in cold and said, let's go with best guesses. And we were lucky and had enough support to be able to say that this is not right for Aroostook County. Social media was a huge advantage to us. The one thing that this did was it stirred the pot, whether good, bad, ugly, indifferent, it got people talking about something and everybody had a point or a way to stand on this. I can say that most of the community members were completely against the ban in general. So we not only shared far and wide with all of our stakeholders providing this, we also created a really fast petition literally 3 days before the ordinance came on and said, sign if you're in agreement to stop saying that this is not the right way to do this. I think our city councilors had were open to changes and open to what they wanted to do, but were genuinely concerned about individuals sleeping outside. But there needed to be education provided to the city councilors of what the hardships were, what the realities were for those individuals, and what the effects would happen if this was actually enacted. So we did that a couple of different ways. Again, we use social media. We talked about this being a criminalization of poverty. We said that we're penalizing something for somebody that in often cases do not have choice of. Our shelter is full. We are at capacity. It is not a matter of them choosing to not access, although we did have people that genuinely chose for their own individual reasons to sleep outside because they felt it was safer. And that was okay. It was okay for them to say because of past treatment trauma experiences that they had in shelter, that sleeping outside was more safe to them than being in a cot situation with 40 people in one room. We talked about how this was going to increase mental health. You want to look at somebody who has no roof over their home and feeling hopeless before, wait until you can't even allow them to sit on grass. And we talked about those really hard things about it's going to put a negative impact on the community. Instead of teaching a culture of compassion and collaboration, we were scaring people. We were teaching fear. And those were pieces that we really wanted to bring home, not to mention point out a population and say, this is not a part of us, when in reality, this is. We took a lot of time to break down all of the myths and stereotypes of those experiencing homelessness. So when our new housing came up, we did a huge study of everybody that went into our housing. And I wish I could share it to you. It's wonderful to actually see it. A lot of people said that if you build it, they will come. And so we were having a lot of individuals come up to the county because of the housing, when in reality, we showed that all of the tenants were local individuals. Our homeless population was local people living in our state, native born, who had fallen on difficult times. We showed that the majority of them had employment. The majority had income. We had one person out of our 13 units who had zero income. So we were trying, we brought all these facts to prove the myths and the stereotypes. We actually talked to our local PD and we said, do you have the ability to do this? And our PD was 100% on board and said, we don't have the ability and we don't want to do this. That was a huge selling point for this as well. I asked the PD went back, and I loved the stats on the criminalization part of it. We actually went and showed every single stat. In the last 600 calls, there was only one call associated with an individual experiencing homelessness. So they couldn't even use crime against this as being a drive to pull the ban, because every myth that they had, we dispelled with what was the truth and how this is going to react. We have a local hospital. We shared that what's going to happen by doing this is you're going to frustrate. We have an overpopulated jail. I serve on the jail board as well, and we ship people out, and we talked about money. I said, you want to talk about money? We pay $90 a day to ship somebody out because we don't have boards to do that. What are you going to do with an individual experiencing homelessness when you keep telling them that they have to move? You're going to upset them. They're going to do a crime. Likely it's in our favor to potentially find a place to live, because and go to jail, which is going to increase our jail population, or they're going to stay in our local PD's lobbies. They're going to stay in our homeless or our hospitals. And now our waits are going to be even longer for ERs. So when you had all of these pieces together, it was really exciting to be able to say, holy cow, this is the wrong piece. This is the wrong way to do this. We attended council meetings leading up. Our local homeless director shared the myths. We have a hub coordinator who shared the same thing, all of these pieces. We were asked to meet, two of us were asked to meet prior to the council vote for executive session, and really kind of laid it out without the community hearing what the truth was going to be, and these really hard conversations. Conveniently, the same time, we actually just had a meeting the week before with the governor. There was a housing summit that stated that Maine, specifically as our state, was behind production to meet housing needs by 38,000, and by 2030 we were going to be behind up to 38,000 to 46,000 behind the housing needs that we need to securely house everybody. To nobody's issue other than we are behind production. And those key factors really showed the story about this is not just people struggling with drug addiction or mental health or having all of these pieces come out. There was more to the puzzle that impacted our situation that we were on. Am I probably at 5 minutes already? I could talk forever. I am so sorry.
Yeah, no, you're amazing. I think I mean, I learned so much. I think we're about ready to wrap up. Do you want to close this out on this section?
I will just wrap up or done.
15 seconds.
50 seconds. The biggest thing is, as I'm going to say, is we brought speakers with lived experience and had them talk on the panel about what this would have done when they were experiencing homelessness themselves. They said, I would have broken in, I would have created a crime, I would have done this. You think our crime is that? That was huge, hearing that and breaking down all of those facts. And I'm sorry. Thank you very much for allowing me the time to talk.
All good. Thank you so much for joining us, Heidi. And I think I heard a few things that I think we're seeing across the country, right? This myth that people experiencing homelessness are coming from other cities, not true. Not true in Maine, not true anywhere. This proof point that when folks get housing, they don't experience homelessness anymore, which we know is true across the country. And that we can win, that it's an uphill battle, but we are seeing opportunities across the country for us to win in small towns and in big cities, that we are building power, even though sometimes it might not seem like it. Sometimes the things are going in our favor due to the work of all of the amazing folks working on the ground. I want to keep us moving. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay from Mountain State Justice, who's going to talk about some of the work that is happening in Morgantown, West Virginia to fight against camping ordinance.
Hey, I'm Lindsay. I'm an attorney and an organizer at Mountain State Justice in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is in the north central part of the state. Yeah, I feel like I'm about to change the tone of the call a bit, and I apologize in advance. It was super interesting to hear Heidi's breakdown of what happened in Maine, because our experience here is you literally the mirror, the complete opposite of what Heidi experienced there. We did all of those things. I'm gonna say it always matters, right? But it certainly wasn't key to moving our community forward on the issues of criminalizing poverty and homelessness. So I'm just going to drop in the chat. I'm not fancy. I use like Word documents and Google Docs sorry, I can't multitask.
Lindsay, I got it. You keep going.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, I could have asked for help. But I have like a Google Doc where we got together to put some ideas down on paper for a community that neighbors ours that's now about to fight its own camping ban. And I guess I'm struggling to know where to start. We have in Morgantown, which is sort of the quote unquote liberal bastion of West Virginia, which is not a liberal place. We're commonly thought of as being very red and very conservative, but the truth is that many of our people are very disenfranchised. I don't think that's an accurate reflection of West Virginia as a whole at all. But Morgantown has long been thought of as the outlier. It's where, our major land-grant university is. But in Morgantown, we hate poor people. And so I know earlier we were talking about how this is a right-wing like coup. I definitely think that liberals and Democrats are as horrible on this issue as anyone else. In fact, we have a very liberal city council that was super excited to criminalize homelessness. I want to shout out one of our counselors, Brian Butcher. He's on this call. He fought tooth and nail and continues to fight tooth and nail to reduce harm in our community. He's just been like a shining light. And if any other lawmakers ever wanted to reach out to somebody fighting the good fight, Brian is a go-to. So yeah, we have been at this for a couple of years now, fighting both panhandling bans and an increased enforcement of a variety of criminal laws against people experiencing homelessness or poverty in Morgantown. We have been organizing in advance of the ban that is now, we have a ban that passed. But we had been organizing long before that ban came to fruition. And so now we're on the backside of that ban using a referendum process that has never been successfully used before, that is outlined in our city's charter, that essentially says you can either pass a piece of legislation or repeal a piece of legislation if you get a certain number of signatures of registered voters in your town. So for us, that number, because we don't have high voter turnout, is about 1,300. So as soon as the ban passed, we had organized for weeks in advance. We have an organizer actually from Planned Parenthood, Sarah Hudson, who gave us the idea to use the referendum process. And so we had our committee ready to go. The ban went into effect or was passed by our council after a 7-hour council meeting that we filibustered beautifully, might I add. There's a link in the Google Doc if folks want to watch that entire meeting, because it's quite moving. But moving and facts and data don't do anything for lawmakers in West Virginia, and dare I say for many of the lawmakers in places where you all live too. The only thing they understand is power. So we the next morning we got up, we got our committee, we went to city council, and we filed for our referendum. So what we had was 30 days to collect 1,300-ish signatures from registered voters in town saying that they oppose this ban. We were able actually to get 2,000, and I could talk at length about how our organizers were able to do that. they worked their asses off and they were deeply committed, and many of them sacrificed their mental and physical well-being to see it done. It was a beautiful coalition of students, doctors, lawyers, social workers, impacted folks, street outreach workers, just pretty much everybody you can think of was involved in this door-to-door canvassing effort to do outreach to voters, educate them on the issue, and get them to sign our petition. So we're now in a waiting period where the city is verifying those signatures. If we're successful, it will be, the city council will be forced to reconsider the ban. I feel confident, and Brian, I'm sure will agree, that they will not repeal it. And so what happens if they refuse to repeal it is it's forced onto the ballot. So it would be on the ballot for our spring elections, which consequently is the same time when nearly all of the folks who voted for the ban are up for re-election. So one, we're going to repeal the ban, I'm confident. And the reason that we're going to do that is we got more signatures on this petition than have ever voted in any city council election in Morgantown. So we have the votes, we have the power to remove these folks from office, and we have the power to repeal the ordinance. Now, we live in a state that as soon as they catch wind of the win that we're absolutely going to get, they're going to come in and do some preemption. They're always trying to figure out how they can take local power away, but that's a fight that we're going to have to fight next year when they try to pass a statewide camping ban anyway. But for now, we've bought ourselves some time. And I think just some of like the important things that I'll note, this is, well, I have some observations, I think, just very quickly. One is that all the policy in the world is beautiful and wonderful, and it's so exciting for me to hear about all the good work that the folks on this call are doing. I think my experience as an organizer and a person working with folks on the street is that data does not move lawmakers. Again, I think they only respond to power and money, which is power. And so I think what we did right here, and what is really going to set us up for success in the future, is that we're building power, and that's tenant power. You know, we're now, our next phase is going to be working on eviction defense and doing all sorts of really cool aggressive legal strategies, jury trials, appeals, things like that. So we're working sort of upstream to keep people housed, to put pressure on landlords, to build that tenant power, to build the power of our folks who are living on the streets. And really trying to make our elected officials afraid. I actually wrote down a note that I just want to read really quickly. So a movement that revolves around influencing policymakers is doomed. And maybe not where you live, but I will say, generally speaking, where many of us live. If our hopes and dreams lie in convincing people who could give two shits whether our people live or die, despite the best evidence that we lay before them, we're doomed. And so I think what's most important, and I think what we have learned here in Morgantown, and are happy to talk to anybody anywhere in the country about, because West Virginians do know how to organize. We do know how to take care of each other. We are fiercely dedicated to mutual aid and ground up power building. And I think that what we're doing here, what we're building here is going to pay dividends in the future. And I just don't think that that's rooted in data or policy. And so what I hope going forward is that some of this conversation can shift away from or shift into a place where we're definitely talking about those top-down solutions, but we're talking about the fact that folks on the ground, like my friends who organize nonstop for 30 days, need money and infrastructure support. We know the arguments. We can make the arguments left and right. And, you know, we back that up with the threat of solid litigation through, you know, my organization, Mountain State Justice, and others. But what we really need is some backbone support for building these tenant unions, building power at this very grassroots level. I think that's really a critical piece of moving forward in West Virginia, but also probably where you live too. So I rambled a bit, but I just wanted to get out some of those foundational thoughts based on you know, what we're working on here in Morgantown.
That was amazing. Wow. Amazing work, and agreed on all points about the need to build power. So I think you teed us up perfectly, Lindsay, for our last section of this, which you have already kicked us off, which is, what can we do for y'all? Like, what should we be doing? We have all these national groups that are interested in fighting against the criminalization of homelessness. The world has changed. The way homelessness is criminalized has gotten a lot worse in the past several months. I'm going to turn it over to Tori from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition to just kind of lead us through as much as the conversation we can have with 200 folks on a webinar.
Yeah, so we're gonna bear with us. We're gonna figure this out. But hi everyone, I'm Tori. I'm with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, project manager on our state and local innovation team, which is a new team over there that works on state and local policy. And happy to facilitate this conversation with you all today. We're hoping to get your active involvement. So if you could raise your hand to respond, that would be awesome. You can also put comments in the chat. We'll keep an eye out and shout those out, but either raising your hand or putting comments in the chat would be fantastic. So my first question for you all is really, what are you seeing in your community around efforts to really criminalize homelessness or prevent the criminalization of homelessness? I've seen some really great messages earlier in the chat, but hoping that folks will share with us right now.
All right, I'm going to try my best to recognize folks in order. So I think we have Batman of San Jose first, and then Karen Kelsey Kearney second.
Are we able to unmute them?
Yes, I'm
we
working
cannot.
on the unmuting function.
Thanks,
Okay, Batman of San Jose should be able to comment now.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Thanks. Hi. So I'm obviously in San Jose, California. Something that we've seen recently that was kind of unexpected is certain groups having more power than you'd think. One of the local organizations in Santa Clara County that has had a lot of influence over encampment clearance policy is actually Valley Water, the county's water utility, because they own so much land along the creeks where a lot of people stay. So I think something that could be a really interesting focus would be looking into how can we get these groups that have control over the actual land in the area to influence that policy. Because something that we have been kind of working on here is really pushing that Valley Water Company to not just give in to what the city and the county wants to do, which is just clear all the encampments, but instead just not do that and kind of force the city and the county to actually help people and do their job. So I think that could be something that's really, really interesting. As well, I had a question. I'm currently trying to develop like a heat map in my city to basically display how many times certain locations have been swept by an encampment, and then correlate that with a monetary cost. I put in a couple public requests, but I'm really struggling to get access to that data. Are there any like best practices that you guys can think of in order to get data from like local city or even like state level kind of organizations? And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Thank you all for hosting this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. So if folks have ideas about the heat map best practices, if you could put that in the chat, and then we can send that information out. And Batman, I was seeing that, or you had mentioned that you all were working with the utilities and asking them to, not give in to what the city and county wanted them to do. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Have you been building relationships with those folks, or how have you been engaging with them?
Oh yeah, of course. So really what we did is the Valley Water Company hosted a meeting where basically they were going to make a encampment clearance policy. They were going to start being an organization that actually conducted these sweeps. This was back, I believe, in April. I believe, Sean, if you're here, you can correct me on that. But we got a whole bunch of people to show up and basically either in person or on Zoom, basically show up and tell them that this is a really terrible idea. And basically just swarmed them with kind of a rebuttal. And because they're not a city they're not a city council, they're not like a local government organization other than when it pertains to like a water utility kind of policy. It was really overwhelming for them. So they actually put that policy on hold.
Wow.
So we got them to stay and not make a decision up until now, and they still haven't made a decision. There was recently a big meeting where they actually brought in city level officials from San Jose, county level officials from Santa Clara, and a couple of the nonprofits in the area. There's a lot of like city sponsored nonprofits in San Jose, like Home First, which is notoriously terrible. But this kind of, it essentially put the ball in the city's court, essentially. Like it forced them to basically say, okay, we can't just let them handle it. We have to actually do something now. So I'm thinking that I'm sure in a lot of cities, there are those areas where a lot of people are staying, like along rivers or in areas that have, a lot of land is being owned by one group and then people are residing on that land. I think a focus on kind of land in terms of policy could be something that's really interesting, because I think if you can get the group that owns the land to not do anything or to kind of avoid enforcing an ordinance, that forces the city to actually, that forces the local government to actually help people, or at the bare minimum, it buys people time.
Yeah.
So I think that could be
that's
a really
great,
interesting argument to
that's
make.
a great point. I'm sorry to interrupt. We just want to make sure we get.
Oh, yeah, no, of course.
But
I tend to ramble, so please cut
no,
me
it's
off.
okay. We'd love to follow up with you on this too. And thanks for sharing all of that. I think up next we have S. Cartwright. If you want to share what's going on in your community.
I'm Sean. I'm the same place as Batman. So
Okay.
the update with the Valley Water situation is that they proposed maybe a month ago, after the big meeting where everyone came and fought that the proposed policy to sweep everyone out of the over 200 miles of property that Valley Water owns. They came back and now the tentative proposal is to have sanctioned camps. And we were shocked. Like, wow, that's a pretty big dramatic decrease there. So it's basically, if everyone follows the rules and keeps their area of the creek clean, that they will get trash pickup, porta potties, and wash stations and be allowed to stay where they are. And we're pretty excited about that. There's some rules that we wanted to add. Valley Water keeps making it. There's so many, our workers keep getting attacked by unhoused people. They've been this, they've been that. And all the advocates are like, we've never been attacked. So like, how come they attack you? So we're we're pushing that we should have trainings and stuff like that, even though honestly we just think they're full of shit, because how come you keep getting attacked and none of us do? I mean, there's something that's very strange about that.
Yeah, that's weird. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
I had a couple of quick more things. Our mayor is trying to shove everybody also out of the creeks and into the San Diego style tent cities, and he said he will use the stick method because that always works, and we are trying to fight that. And then, sorry, I've had 2 brain surgeries. And then we're working on fighting that. But then there's other things going on in our city. And so there's just been a lot of organizing here to try and fight so many things going on at the same time. The mayor has backed away from the stick method. So that's also good. There's been a lot of meetings where he's been getting like beaten like a piñata. How's it feel? From homeowners who are like, I do not want a tent city right here. So we're kind of in a standoff right now about those things. So we'll see.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much for that update. I appreciate it. So I think we're going to move on to the next set of questions. Is really is looking like, what do you all need from us? What would you like to see in terms of how we structure this work, and how can we support you all in the work that you're doing on the ground? Dawn, I think we'll unmute you.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much.
I was just gonna say, in response to various comments, I'm really convinced that the only way we're gonna truly address homelessness across the country is by a major campaign, much like Mothers Against Drunk Driving or Just Say No. And Lindsay told me that it's a very, very local issue to generate support for this kind of a campaign. My question is, once local groups start working on this, how do we get all of these groups coordinated and collaborated so that it becomes truly a national campaign?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it kind of seems, or it seems like maybe there's some hope that there's a way to maybe connect all of you and in terms of coordination on this effort from all different local places. And I had noticed in the chat there are some comments about maybe doing regional convenings or regional connections and groups so people could, work in those areas together. So, and I'm seeing a thumbs up. So that could be a potential route to go. And thank you for that, Dawn. I think Mustafa, you have your hand raised.
Peace and greetings. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, cool. My name is Mustafa Bey. I am currently in Baltimore, Maryland. I am the state captain for the bond program with the NCH and also a member of the COC. One problem that we have out here in Baltimore is, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Supreme Court case, the Mayor City Council of Baltimore versus Wells Fargo. And it kind of highlights the fact that a lot of banking institutions, and this isn't the first time Wells Fargo has ever been brought to trial, but this brings up the fact that banking institutions are a major factor of why there are a lot of vacants and why a lot of people are homeless. And so the Wells Fargo targeted specific class of people, Black communities in Baltimore, which is the reason why there's over 36,000 vacants in Baltimore right now. They settled in court in 2010, and they settled with 125 million directly to the city, but also 400 and something $million worth of programs and different things to help people supposed to help people transition from homeless to home ownership, providing different plans and things. But come on, let's be real. We ain't seen none of that out here in Baltimore, right? There's been a lot of people who are still homeless due to this fact, and they haven't benefited at all from any of these programs. And so I kind of wanted to highlight the fact that when the city sued, they used the fact that these people were targeted by Wells Fargo, but they did not sue on behalf of the people who were targeted. They only sued on behalf of the city because the city was damaged due to the fact that there was a high rise in vacant houses, neglected vacant houses, right? So let's be real. The city didn't have the intentions of awarding anybody who was targeted by Wells Fargo, any other banking institution in Baltimore, that they used as a means to be able to get money that was supposed to go back into rehabilitated communities that have been impoverished and that were vacant. But they haven't done so until recently. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
A lot of those properties have been corroding over time. They lost value. You can buy property if you're an individual for $1, but $90,000 if you have for renovations. So my thing is this: that I would need some kind of somebody that has a lot of more legal experience than I do, law experience, to help me not only locate the people who need to be compensated, because I don't have access to those files on record. You see what I'm saying? I have to pay, I don't have that right now. But I'm kind of wanting to go and look for people who were damaged, or or who suffered homelessness as a result of Wells Fargo's active misprision of funds, rates, things like that, getting them compensated and getting them back into being able to have an affordable home. Because let's be real, we want to stop gentrification. We want to stop people from being able to move into these people's communities where they lost their homes due to the fraud and all this, and then having them push them people out in order to have a whole new community people come in, and raising rates and making it difficult or impossible for people to be able to get in to a newly renovated home.
Thank you, Mustafa. I appreciate that. Yeah, we can connect you to some Baltimore-based lawyers. For sure, offline we have those resources. Jesse, do we have one more opportunity? I think Hale had their hand raised.
I see Hale's hand is down. I think we have Pony and Alyssa. If y'all can be super duper quick, that will be great, and then we'll wrap us up and send out the recording. And again, this is the first of many, many, many of these conversations.
Okay. So I am Pony. I am with Vocal Kentucky. So what we see here in Louisville is a bunch of just camp clearings with no alternatives besides being cited and going to jail. Okay. Then what we do see is, when it comes available, is that we see housing vouchers, right? But okay, so I was homeless myself for 15 years. Okay, housed now for 3. When we talk about this, we need to have like a process that people have a safe place. If they want to continue to camp, great. Okay. But we need to make sure that there's a process that people have that I'm going to take you from being unhoused for however long you were unhoused, and let's teach you how to be back into a structure. Let's then take you and further that along and teach you the etiquettes of life again. Because if any of this is going to continue to fail, and we're going to continue to see, besides just the price of living going up, we can't sit here and just take somebody straight from the streets that has been doing street things and think that they're not going to do the same thing inside of their house. I did. I cut copper from here to the end of the block in my home. Okay. But that's because I didn't know no better. Realistically, I knew better, but life, I didn't know no better. So that's what we see here in Louisville. We see a lot of, hey, your second sight, you're going to go to jail. First one, they're going to come and they're going to throw everything that you own away. There should be no tents. They even are. So here's what's so crazy about Kentucky, that even if you have the intent to camp, they can cite you for that. Intent to camp. And I'm like, okay, I don't get it. And I mean, I think there's a whole lot of work, because we have to remember Kentucky is so far behind everybody else in the United States.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, Pony, I'm sorry, I hate to cut you off, but thank you for sharing what you're going through and what you're seeing there. And I don't know, Jesse, should we do Alyssa or wrap it up?
We're gonna wrap up, and then I'm happy to stay on and let's say hear your thoughts. I just want to be respectful of everyone who's taken 90 minutes out of the day. Our aim is to do these calls 4 times a year. But again, we are super, super open to really any and all ideas. We're in a period of thinking about structure and what's next. So we will be emailing up this recording. Please email me, email any of us. We would love to keep this conversation going. Thanks to everyone who is working behind the scenes to make this happen. Tori, Alex, Sarah, Brooke, Haley, Sam, a lot of folks making sure this was successful. So thank you, everybody, and we will be in touch. Alyssa, if you want to stay on, I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes. And also always happy to connect offline if that's better.
Where? What did he say? Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. My name's Alyssa. I'm an advocate in Rhode Island, and I just wanted to speak to Alex's point with regards to his question about sharing personal perspective. And I had a question and wanted to know if there was anything in an effort for an organized speakers bureau for folks with lived experience.
I know that if folks are still on from the National Coalition for the Homeless, NCH runs a National Speakers Bureau for folks with lived experience of homelessness. And I'd be happy to make that connection. I'm trying to see if Megan's still on.
Megan is on.
Megan,
Yeah.
I see you, Megan. We'll Alyssa, we will follow up. Oh, she dropped the email in chat. Speakers Bureau at National Homeless.org.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this call. It was really informative and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course, everyone. Thank you all so much. And, again, please be in touch. Here's my email and we look forward to seeing you all soon.